right, today we're going to crack open a field guide to a world that's, well, it's pretty much hidden. It exists right under our noses, and sometimes right inside of us. We are diving into the incredibly strange and fascinating lives of parasitic flatworms. You know, at first glance, these creatures can look totally alien, but really, they are absolute masters of survival. They're flat, they're ancient, and they are just perfectly, and I mean ruthlessly, designed for a life lived completely unseen inside other living things. Okay, so before we dive in, we need a name for what we're actually studying, right? The field we're exploring is called Helminthology. It's the scientific study of all parasitic worms, or helminths. So let's get started. First things first, let's get the lay of the land. The entire world of parasitic worms is basically split into two major groups, and it's all defined by one super fundamental trait, their shape. You've got your roundworms, and you've got your flatworms. So on one side, you have the nematodes, you probably know them as roundworms, and they're typically kind of thread-like. But on the other side, and this is our focus today, are the platyhelminths. That name literally comes from the Greek words for flatworm, and you can see right away just how different that body plan really is. So what is the flatworm blueprint, really? What are the fundamental rules and the shared characteristics that tie every single member of this group together? Here's the cheat sheet, the absolute essentials. They are flattened from top to bottom, almost like they've been stepped on. They're bilaterally symmetrical, perfect mirror images right down the middle. Most of them are hermaphroditic, meaning they have both male and female organs. And get this, to save energy, they've completely ditched things like respiratory and circulatory systems. They just absorb everything they need through this tough outer skin called a tegument. It is an incredibly efficient, minimalist design for a parasite. All right, our first stop on this little guided tour is a major class within the flatworms, the trematodes, but you probably know them as the flukes. So, the first thing you'll notice about them is that classic leaf-like shape. It's their most defining feature, and they can be tiny, just a few millimeters, or surprisingly big, sometimes up to 8 centimeters long. So you've got to wonder, how on earth do they manage to stay put inside a host without just getting flushed out? The answer? These incredibly powerful suckers. They've got one around the mouth and a second one on their belly, both designed to latch on tight to host tissues. They are absolute pros at just holding on. Okay, now this is where things get really wild. A fluke's life isn't just a simple cycle. It's more like a super elaborate multi-stage heist, and they need a whole crew of accomplices to pull it off. So the heist kicks off when eggs are passed from a host into the water. From these eggs hatch these tiny, swimming larvae called muricidia. But their freedom doesn't last long. They're on a desperate do-or-die mission. They have to find and break into a very specific kind of snail, their first intermediate host, or they die. Simple as that. And this just shows you those first two critical stages perfectly. On the left, you've got the microscopic eggs. Each one is like a little time capsule. And on the right, that's the unsuspecting getaway driver for this heist, the snail. It becomes a living, breathing incubator for the next stage of the fluke's crazy development. Okay, so let's move on to our next family. And trust me, these guys take that flatworm blueprint and run in a completely different, and honestly, even stranger direction. Let's talk about the tapeworms, or cestodes. Okay, you might want to prepare yourself for this. This is honestly one of the most mind-blowing facts in all of biology. An adult tapeworm has no mouth, no stomach, no intestine. The whole system? Gone. Why? Well, it's swimming in a sea of perfectly pre-digested food inside its host's gut. So it just soaks up all the nutrients it needs right through its skin. That tough tegument we talked about. So that begs the question, right? If it's not for eating, what's the head even for? Well, it's not really a head in the way we think of one. This is the scolex, and its one and only job is to be an anchor. It's armed with a whole array of suckers and in some cases a nasty little ring of sharp hooks, all designed to dig into the intestinal wall and never ever let go. Tucked right behind that anchor is the tapeworm's engine room, the neck. It might look simple, but it's a non-stop factory of cell division, just endlessly churning out new body segments, one after another, pushing the older ones further and further down the line. And this is what that factory makes, this long, long chain of segments we call proglottis. You should think of a tapeworm less as one single animal and more like a long living colony. Each one of those proglottis is basically its own little self-contained reproductive packet, complete with both male and female organs. As they get pushed further from the neck, they mature, until the ones at the very end are little more than bags of fertilized eggs, ready to just pop off. So how do they get all those eggs out into the world? Well, they've got two main playbooks. Some species just break off those final egg-filled segments and they get passed right out of the host. But others have a special little pore to release their eggs directly into the host's intestine, almost like a continuous egg-laying assembly line. Okay, let's just pause for a second and recap. We've seen some absolutely incredible and, kind of strange adaptations. So what does the Parasite's playbook really teach us about how these creatures became such unbelievable masters of survival? It really all boils down to a few brilliant strategies. First up, extreme specialization. They just get rid of anything they don't absolutely need, like an entire digestive system. Second, hermaphroditism. Being your own mate is a huge advantage when you're living a solitary life. Third, those complex life cycles. Using other animals like snails is a genius way to protect your vulnerable young and guarantee a path to the next host. And finally, powerful attachment tools, because the number one rule of being a parasite is don't get evicted. And that really brings us to our final thought. These worms, they seem so simple on the surface, but their solutions to life's biggest problems are incredibly sophisticated. Over millions of years, they have absolutely perfected the art of living off of others. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What can their strange, stripped-down survival strategies teach us about the sheer, relentless ability of life to adapt, to survive, and to thrive in literally any environment imaginable?